searching for answers.
Here are today's top stories.
It's been over 24 hours.
And the local news.
What we see are a lot of things that are going on the earth.
This is Art of Heaven News Talk.
Broadcasting live from WHPC Studios in Garden City, New York. This is Art of Heaven News Talk, where we deliver global, national, and local news through the lens of faith, comparing these stories to Scripture. I'm your host, Johnny BRUMIT, and joining me today are my co-hosts, pastor and theologian Nathan Gasaway, media personality Chrystina Orlando, and local pastoral intern, currently in seminary, Dan Bartucci. If you want to join the conversation, lines are open at 516-572-7440. So let's just jump right in. We try to recap the last 7 days of news here at Art of Heaven News Talk, and it is so much to do in a half an hour. But we're going to jump right in. I got the big story of the week we're going to start off with. This week, the U.S. Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, said he will push for a tobacco-style warning label for social media. And what this means is, when you open up a social media platform, you will get some sort of label warning. What do you think about this? Is it going to work?
Finally.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Emotional and mental health are probably just as important as physical health. It's not like you can divorce the two. And why not protect children if it will help? That's the real question. We have protections for them in other ways, and not just kids, but other people, because it does affect mental health. We have good data to support that now. We've been at this for a while, and it seems like, I don't know whether we can put up really nasty-looking pictures like they do for tobacco, but something has to tip people off that this isn't just some neutral territory that's easy.
But is it going to work, though? It's not like it's smoke in the lungs here.
I've bought in my youth packets of cigarettes with the diseased lungs on it, but you know, we've tried this before, and I think it's a right step. Let me say that first. We have done this before, but we put explicit lyric warning labels, right? I remember first time I was going out to buy Guns N' Roses' double album, Appetite for Destruction 1 and 2, and it had these big stickers on it, and I go, I kind of want to buy this a little bit more because there's something weird on it. So I don't think we'll see so much of that as we did because it's the first time, but we have to do something. I agree with you, Nathan. This is a mental health crisis fueled by the technology in young kids' hands.
Well, and this is what we call brain hacking. You'll recall, and maybe some of you don't know this, but they hired experts that develop gambling techniques for, like, say, Atlantic City or Las Vegas, where these social scientists were experts at getting people to stay gambling. And so what they did was hire them to create algorithms for media. And it's like, if you've ever done this, flip through a news feed, if it's a bottomless news feed that doesn't end, you'll keep scrolling, for example. And that's called a brain hack. And children are disproportionately susceptible to it. Their brains haven't developed to the extent ours. And think about it, adults struggle with this. So it seems to me that something has to be done, maybe get rid of some of the bottomless scrolls, some other things. Who knows? But it is affecting young girls disproportionately, and guys too.
Yeah, I mean, it's evident. We know that social media affects anxiety levels, depression, especially among young people. I think it's interesting that the only two products right now that have Surgeon General's warnings are alcohol and cigarettes. So this is a pretty big deal to compare social media to only two other things.
Wow.
I also think it's interesting that it's not that they're going after the companies or trying to make any mandates to control the tactics that they use, but they're just going to throw a warning on it. I wonder, is the internet so far gone? Is it such a wild, wild west out here?
Yeah, for
that
sure.
we can't really monitor what happens? It's just like, well, at your own risk, go for it.
Yeah, but the endless news scrolling, right, has a name. It's called doom scrolling. It's not anything positive. We know it's bad. And I think you can make a case for mental health in young adults. It is as bad as some of the other things that you mentioned.
And we're talking about kids again primarily. So who knows? All I know is that China, and I'm not always the biggest advocate of everything they do as far as human rights and whatever, but I will say this, that the kinds of things that they get to scroll through are typically educational, and it's limited. I'm not saying I want to censor free speech, but I do think we need to have safeguards for young people.
100%. And so does Europe, actually, because there's an article that came out today. I printed this literally like an hour before the show. It says that Spain, Ireland, and England are basically advocating to keep phones out of kids under 12 years old. Like they're
I love that.
They're really like going hard.
But schooling has to change too, right? Because, now all the platforms are, your kid is almost at a disadvantage if they don't have some kind of, now again, there's Chromebooks, there's things like that. But once it's in a young adult's hands, there's no stopping it. So I think we have to this is a start. I don't think we're limiting free speech.
Well, and this is, a relatively new thing, 2008. We've got enough data now to show that this is not benign. This is really cancerous in a way. And so almost like smoking is cancerous, this is mentally and emotionally cancerous for some.
I came up with this little saying, secondhand social media, after seeing this story, because the effects of social media does not just affect the person using the platform. It has massive ramifications on society, and we've seen that. I mean, also, have you ever been really close friends with someone who's addicted to their phone? It changes the whole atmosphere of your friendship, of your relationship, the things that they talk about. It really is, I think, something that societally just affects everyone.
Oh yeah, I can't stand having lunch with somebody, or if somebody's going on a date with somebody and they're on the phone, it's like, come on. But Dan, to your point though, I had a lighthearted conversation with somebody at my daughter's school and about these iPads and all this technology. Everything is done online.
Right.
Like, I can't even save my daughter's test on a paper format, you know what I mean, with an A on it anymore. But they said, she told me, she's like, this day and age, they need to be able to use technology. It's everywhere. They're going to go in the world and need to use it. So we can't hold it back. We can't restrict them from that. I mean, they have their phones in class. They have, AirPods in their ears in class.
They're using Apple Pay in the cafeteria, right? And again, we have to remember there's benefits in technology, right? We know as a parent, I know where my kid is, provided they don't turn the location off, right? But almost, we need everybody on board with this because there's a social aspect of it too. The kids' softball teams, baseball teams, hockey teams, right, all use kind of a WhatsApp group. So you can't pull everything, I think, where you're going out of the kids' hands, because then they become socially alienated from everybody, right? Because they're not in the chat about the softball game this weekend. But it is so slippery, I think, Nathan, to your point, we're going to look back on this in 30 years like we did in the 80s and said, oh, smoking wasn't good. We shouldn't be promoting it. Social media isn't good for young adults, young minds.
Well, it certainly has to be tempered, and putting up guardrails for kids in particular, I don't think is a bad idea. So we'll get more information. And really, social media can be a source of disinformation even. So being able to get accurate information, I think, is important too. And,
if you have any thoughts about this, you can call us up. The number is 516-572-7440. You're listening to Art Heaven News Talk. And this is a perfect segue into our next story here. Okay? We know that it's a federal requirement for 18 to 25-year-old men to register for the Selective Service, right? The House passed a bill this week, and now it looks like they're extending the age to 26 and are considering including women. So this is the story in itself, right? But there's also a sub-story within it, because there was a scare on social media that went viral. Everyone thought, oh my gosh, they're going to implement the draft. We're going to World War III, and everyone's panicking. Now, AP News, Associated Press, I'll give them credit, because I've never actually seen an article like this from the AP, where they said, they wrote in bold letters at the top, claim, the U.S. military is planning to reinstitute the draft. Then they write, AP's assessment, false. Defense officials confirmed the armed forces have made no such recommendation to Congress. So it's really not there's nothing to it. We're not going to war. It's very normal. We've been doing this for years, right?
Yeah, but I think, Chrystina, you kind of nailed it, right? This is a secondhand smoke effect, right? This is how conspiracy theories get out. This is why we still have so much financial impact from things like cybercrime. And there was about, I want to say 2007, 2008, the Associated Press had their Twitter feed hacked. They put out a tweet, or an X, saying that there was an explosion in the White House, President Obama injured. The stock market went into a mini crash immediately, tens of millions of dollars out of the market, because we're so inclined to read social media quickly, to get news out of it. Another one, there was a British Airways Boeing 777. It's on takeoff from Las Vegas. Engine catches fire. They have to do an evacuation. It hits social media first because as people are going down the evacuation slides, they are live streaming it on their social media platform. So it's first to news a lot of times.
Wow.
It is. It's scary also with the AI capabilities that we have, and it's only going to get worse, I think, because you're seeing in what you might think is the proof right in front of you, but it's really fabricated.
Something like a deep fake.
Oh, yeah.
But what's interesting is then the question arises, do we police information as it goes out, or do we allow for more information to counter it? This is always a tricky balance, right? So who gets to censor this in some ways? Now, for children, I think it's good to put up guardrails, but for adults, sometimes I think people, were saying if common sense were so common, why don't more people have it? You would think that common sense was a very common commodity, but some people do fall for the okey doke. I do think, though, I'm not so sure that I want to have the government censoring everything. I think it's good to have platforms to have more information, but we also have to maybe teach people to be a little savvier technologically and just common sense.
A little. We have flat earthers. Please, by the way, if there's a flat earther out here, please give them the phone number, Johnny. Let them call during the show. But again, go on social media, go on any platform you want. There are a million theories why we're living in a flat dome, and you got to look a little further. This is hard to hear.
I feel like we should just pull the plug on social media. It's been a good run, internet. It's great. Let's give it back to the government. Just 20 years ago.
Well, we
didn't know about these theories then. They stayed in the basement.
Didn't the internet start as the dark web?
As I think it started at something that Xerox didn't capitalize on. I bet they regret it now. It started out with, who knows its real inceptions, but I do know this. Now it can magnify misinformation. You can get social media panic. You can do all kinds of things that are nefarious, and people can fall for it, but I'm reluctant to give the government a blank check
for sure
for checking free speech.
Yeah.
So we have to figure out a way to balance it and protect the kids and other people too.
Now, the crazy part is we've came a long ways. What about the National Enquirer back in the day? This is my opinion. I don't think there's regulating. There's no regulating.
I didn't know there was a lot of smoke on some of those.
Do you remember
there was
Boy?
Fire. Which one?
Okay, when I was a kid, every newspaper in the supermarket was like, Bad Boy escapes from his cell or whatever. And it was this photo, it wasn't photoshopped. It was this Dracula-looking creature. And it was supposed to be I was so confused. But it was on all the newspapers.
I don't know. See, that's what I'm talking about. This stuff was around before the internet.
But don't we think that as parents and as educators and as pastors and things like that, we need to help people discern better? What I'm saying is the antidote seems not to be to cut off access to information. It's to teach or to disseminate information that teaches people to know right from wrong, being able to discern between a truth and a lie, things of that nature.
Listen, there's a lot of news this week, and I got another story coming up here at Art Heaven News Talk. And once again, if you have a comment, you can always call 516-572-7440. So this week, the government legislation was passed. Louisiana is becoming the first state to require the 10 Commandments in every single classroom.
Well, I'm not so sure it was the first state. Kentucky did it a long time ago. There were other places. In fact, the 10 Commandments appeared in most classrooms for a very, very long time. But this is being instantiated in legislation. And actually, this may get back to that thing, teaching people to discern between right and wrong, good and bad. Now, the question is do we want our teachers teaching religion to our students? And my answer would probably be no. I don't want anyone instructing my kids or anyone else's kids in religion. I want to be able to choose that. But are the 10 Commandments something that transcend a religious sect? And I think insofar as we're talking about Western civilization, it's true. Historically, much of Western civilization, the laws and such, have been built on these 10 Commandments. In fact, all the great monotheistic religions seem to agree on this Moses character and the 10 Commandments. So having it there as an historical thing, in and of itself, I don't know that it's bad. I don't know that it means that we're imposing a religion. I would be the first to protest someone instructing my child in a religion, especially one that I didn't approve of. But is it really the government forcing religion on someone if there's just an image of something up there, an historical image? I don't know about that.
Yeah, unfortunately, my perspective is a little limited. I had 12 years of Catholic schooling, so there was always something on the wall religious. But I think, Nathan. So what happens? You put up the pillars of Islam, in the classroom. Like, how do we handle that now? If it gets pushed more and more, and I'm sure another state's going to start to counter this.
And the question is how long have those things been historically woven into the fabric of our system? Because it is history. The Ten Commandments. Mm-hmm. It is history, this guy Moses. So if you taught it as history, I don't see the biggest problem. The problem would be is if the federal government is trying to establish a religion for the people and force them to comply with it, then I think that's a real problem, because every time the church and the state get into bed together, it's the church that changes, not the state. So, and the Establishment Clause was designed to protect churches, religious groups, and people who have religious beliefs from a federal government imposition on their belief systems. And I think that's a little bit different than what we call separation of church and state.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. The phrase separation of church and state actually comes from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to a Baptist church in 1802. It was a letter to the Danbury Baptist Association. And the church was in fear because they feared that they would be persecuted because they're a religious minority. But Jefferson used the phrase separation of church and state. It was more of an attempt to assure these people of faith that they would not be, they would be protected, basically. Their religious liberties would not be infringed upon. But ironically, these words are used many times out of
yeah, well, it's used to limit
how he intended
religious freedom sometimes. And the issue, they have the so-called Lemon Test that the Supreme Court came up with. And I'm not so sure that Lemon Test is so helpful. For example, it needs to have a secular purpose, so on and so forth. But maybe a better test that someone put forward is the coercion test. If it's coercive in that it's forcing people to comply with a religion, then I have a real problem with it. But talking about religion as an historical thing, or just speaking about your faith publicly, well, some people have misunderstood separation of church and state to mean something like, if you have religious belief, you need to keep it to yourself privately, and you can't bring it into the public sphere. But this is precisely the opposite of what the Establishment Clause is supposed to be doing, in protecting religious freedom and allowing people to speak out about it.
So how I understand it is there is no such thing as separation of church and state in the Constitution, right?
That's exactly right.
It's not even there. Those words are not in the Constitution. It's based on what Chrystina said, is that letter from Thomas Jefferson, separation of church and state. And it was originally brought forth because they wanted to protect the church.
I mean, in fact, state governments actually had state religions in New England area up until the 1880s. And again, I'm not the biggest fan of the government and the church getting in bed together. But I will say this new Lemon Test, and I mean relatively new in relationship to the age of our country.
Can you break down what is the Lemon Test?
A Lemon Test is to say, how do we distinguish between, we're trying to keep this idea of neutrality, right, between government and the church. How much, and I'm not so sure that exact neutrality is what this Establishment Clause had in mind, but it basically says that we're not trying to teach a particular religion. I think there's three components to it. The other is you're not trying to, or that whatever this thing is, it has to have a historical value, but it cannot teach religion. It has to be secular in its nature, and it's supposed to promote something good. Now, I'm probably not getting all the details of the Lemon Test right, but that's kind of the gist of it. And it was some of the Supreme Court justices used this as a way of creating the so-called separation of church and state. I think that maybe a coercion test may be a better litmus test for this.
So let's just back up and look at this right now. Modern day, today, all right, a poster-sized copy of the Ten Commandments is now required to be displayed in every public school classroom in Louisiana under this new bill. I mean, that's even LSU. Colleges, too. This is going to be like, change the game. I mean, right there in front of you, you're going to see it on the wall. Now, it goes back. I mean, our whole judicial system, think about it. Judicial, the word, it comes from Judeo beliefs, right?
In God
History.
We Trust was, a founding principle, right? I think it's super interesting. Now, we just talked about social media for 20 minutes, right? This is going to be everywhere on social media. There'll be a deep fake story that, okay, now every student in Louisiana must recite the 10 Commandments. Like, we know how this much will snowball. I think it's interesting. It's funded solely through donations.
Yeah, that was kind of a weird aspect to that rule. Now, I like actually how the bill states it. It says, recognizing the historical role of the 10 Commandments accords with our nation's history and faithfully reflects the understanding of the founders of our nation with the respect to the necessity of civil morality to a function self-government. So they're recognizing the history.
Well,
right
and they're
there.
saying that these kinds of commandments have some kind of moral impact. And just to clarify this lemon test thing, the so-called lemon test has 3 prongs: secular purpose, primary effect, not advancing or inhibiting religion, and no excessive government entanglement with religion. Again, that's a bit subjective on how you apply it.
Now, I love how love how this governor of Louisiana put it, right? He was actually giving a speech in Tennessee, and he actually was quoted saying that, I'm going home to sign a bill that places the 10 Commandments in public classrooms, and I can't wait to be sued. That was his quote before he signed it day of.
I'm sure the American Civil Liberties Union has already filed something. Nathan, I wonder what translation they put on the wall. Maybe the kids will learn some old
almost
English,
certainly,
right?
if it's historically inclined, it's going to be the King James Version, right?
I wonder the impact that this will have. I hope that there's a study done. Will the kids steal the pencil from their classmate? Will they say a swear word if they see that these things are up on the wall? I wonder.
Well, yeah, and are the things that we read impactful on our lives? And at an early age, informative things. We do have people being taught things very early, but could just the presence of those things as historical, moral kinds of things, could they impact the way that people think? And I think there may be some utility.
Absolutely, I do.
Now, there's another story that Jesus is coming up in the news about a manuscript that was found, an Egyptian manuscript. Can you explain this?
Yeah. So this is an early Coptic fragment that was discovered recently. It's about the story of Jesus as a boy. Speaking of classrooms and religion, because it was so kind of sloppily written, it's actually very unwieldy if you read the Greek. It seems like it was probably an exercise in a classroom. Someone was writing this down. But what it concerns is, what was Jesus doing as a little boy? Say, 5 years old. And there's this story about him vivifying clay sparrows. God's eye is on the sparrow. Well, apparently Jesus turned these clay sparrows, brought them to life. And so it's an early fragment. It goes back to maybe the 4th or the 5th century. And this is what we would call apocryphal writings. Now, apocryphal writings are not part of the Christian canon. And by canon, I mean is what books belong in the Bible. This came several hundred, 400 or 500 years after Christ. It's probably written from what we call a Gnostic perspective. Gnosticism was kind of a religion that believed that all things physical were essentially bad, and you got to divinity through secret knowledge and so on and so forth. Anyway, it had a lot of influence in that time period. The gist of it is we found some things that talk about Jesus as a little boy. How authentic is it? Well, I think it probably was written in the 4th or 5th century, but does it have any bearing on our faith as Christians? I think not. I think it's nice to know that even early on, people recognize Jesus as an historical figure. I think it can have some historical value, but insofar as doctrinal value or something of that nature, I think it really has very little impact on the Christian faith.
It just goes to show how incredibly impactful Jesus is and has been throughout history, and he remains to be as omniscient as he's always been.
It's just crazy how this document was just placed on a shelf, though, and then all of a sudden they pull it out and be like, wait a minute, there's Jesus' name on this, and then it comes to light.
It's amazing. I mean, archaeology it's still a new science when you think of how far we are along as humans. It was a couple months ago, I think they found a cornerstone somewhere that referenced a battle with King David.
Yes.
So it's nice, myself as a believer, right? I certainly believe with all my heart and soul, right, that these existed. But every once in a while, when you're talking in conversation and somebody needs more of that material proof, more of that scientific proof, these are kind of fun to have. So I think it's more fun to see what's coming out in the world. I'm sure we're going to find more as people literally keep digging.
It's cool.
Oh, definitely. There was another story in the news this week too. I'll just bring it up. There was a painting that was found at a bus stop, wrapped in plastic. And when it was discovered, they took the plastic off and they looked and they saw that it was a Renaissance era painting of Jesus, or actually, I'm sorry, it was of Joseph and Mary and baby Jesus rushing away to Egypt.
Yeah, this was in London, because, by the way, if you're in Midtown Manhattan, you don't want to unwrap anything at a bus stop. Yeah. I assure you it's not
Step away
a $32 million
But what's crazy was the painting was that story in the Bible of Joseph and Mary.
Yeah, and I think it may sell for $32 million. I mean, what, and it's passed through hands at least 5 times. It was stolen at one point. It's got an interesting history, but wow. Yeah.
Pretty wild. Jesus just keeps coming up in the news. Here, there, all over. So, I'm your host, Johnny Brummett. Thank you for listening. I want to thank Dan Bartucci, Chrystina Orlando, and Nathan Gasaway for being my co-hosts today here at Art of Heaven News Talk, where we recap the last 7 days' biggest stories. Catch us here every Friday, 3:30 to 4 East Coast time. Have a blessed week, family.
See you later.